Hi everyone, I'm Jane and this is Mr. Jane, aka Vince.
Hello everybody.
And we are here today at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. And we are staying in famous room 217, where Stephen King originally had the idea to write The Shining. So this morning, Mr. Jane and I walked around the grounds of the Stanley Hotel and we checked out the hedge maze. And I thought it would be such a cool thing to do to pick up little bits of nature and plants from this area and see if I could make some paintbrushes and what those kind of paintbrushes might do, made with nothing but natural materials. So while we were out, I picked up some of these little naturey bits that you can see over here.
Hand modeling.
And I am gonna see if I can make some paintbrushes out of them and see if I can do a quick little painting with them. And of course, I'm going to show you how you can do that as well with little bits of plants that you may have where you are.
And this could very well be the world's first ever painting tutorial done in room 217 of the famous Stanley Hotel.
How exciting is that?
Right?
I didn't even think about that.
Right.
All right, so while Mr. Jane goes and gets his inspiration from room 217 and starts writing, we are going to get settled and get started making some natural paintbrushes. So let's get started. Okay, so here are some little naturey bits that I picked up outside around the hedge maze at the Stanley Hotel. And what I'm going to do is see if I can make some paintbrushes with these. So I've got my little bits, I've got some sticks for brush handles. So I've got these fun little wheat kind of looking bits. They're very soft. And these grasses, I liked these grasses because they're very curly and very thin on the ends. So I thought that could be fun. And these are little bits off of the hedges in the hedge maze. And after the landscaper came along and gave them a trim, there were a bunch of pieces left on the ground. So I just grabbed a couple. And then this is a neat little flower that I found. It's a dead flower. I assume it was in bloom last year. So this is dry and crispy and hard. So I thought this could be fun to try and do a little bit of stamping with to get a little bit of texture. So we'll see how that works out. And then I just have a spool of thread, just normal sewing machine thread. I picked red because I thought that might kind of look nice with the natural colors, be a nice contrast. And then a pair of scissors. And I'm working on a towel because I am in a hotel and the tabletop is glass and I didn't want to cause the glare. So work with what you have, right? Okay, so I'm just going to pick one to start with, and I think I'm going to start with this one. It's very soft and it could be really fun for a paintbrush. It's already short, so we'll start with that one. So I'm just going to grab a stick, just a random stick, and hold this to the end of the stick. So I'm just going to unspool some thread and wrap it around the stick to hold the stem on. And actually I'm going to leave about an inch and a half hanging off, I think, so that I can tie it to the other side. And then we'll just wrap this really tight, and I'm going to wrap it several times. I mean, these paintbrushes, because they're made out of, completely natural elements, they're really not going to last very long, but I don't want it to just fall apart the first time I use it. And I think if we wrap a little bit of this red thread around the bottom, that kind of looks nice. And it's fun if your materials look nice while you're using them. So that's probably good. So I'm going to cut that so I've got a couple inches hanging off, and then tie these two ends together really tight. Okay, and then I'm going to cut off the loose bits of thread just so they don't get into the paint once we start using it. So there is our first paintbrush. Yay! I'm excited to try this. Okay, let's see what else we have. It might also be fun if you combine different materials, see what happens there. But for now, I'm just going to make a paintbrush with a single material. So let's take this little bit of the evergreen from the hedge maze And I'm gonna break off a few little pieces so that I can arrange them into a shape that I want. And we could make it either a very thin paintbrush or very thick and dense. I think I'm gonna go kind of half and half, so maybe one more piece than that. I think I like that. So because I have a bunch of little pieces right here, I don't want to have to fight with them when I'm putting them on the stick. So I'm going to tie these together first, just to make sure they don't start falling all over the place, which they're probably going to do anyway, because I've got a mess of materials here. I think that this would be a fun project, you know, wherever you are, if you have a place that really means something to you. It could be really fun to just gather a bunch of materials and make some paintbrushes and just create a little painting that reminds you of that trip or that location. And I think creating it with materials that you find in that location makes it even more meaningful. So even if these brushes don't end up being ones that I would ever want to use again, I think I'll probably keep them forever to remember this trip. All right, now I'm gonna stick them on the stick, get it? And wrap it around the edge again, or the end. The altitude has made me full of really bad puns. Stick it on the stick. Scoot it up a little bit so we can use the full length of the bristles there. And then we'll secure it by tying those two ends together. Make sure you tie them a couple of times because otherwise it could come undone as soon as you put some water on the bristles or on the plant, stick, whatever, once you get it wet. All right, there's our second paintbrush. Now I have two sticks left and I have this twirly grassy stuff. So let's see, let's pick one that's got some nice curly ends. So I really like this end. It's already started to fray. As you can see, we've got like 3 little curly ends there. So I'm gonna cut that. And we will work with this. So I'm gonna shred those. And then they're kind of long. So maybe break them in half a couple of times so we can get a brush that's a little bit more dense than, you know, 3 little curly strands. Okay, so there's all those bits. I'm gonna try and turn them so they pretty much go the same direction. Okay, and then I'm gonna tie these together before I put them on the stick. And I'll give them a little bit of a haircut too, because they're kind of crazy, and I think I want this to be a little bit closer to an actual paintbrush. And of course, attach them to our stick. And we'll give them just a little bit of a haircut to kind of even out the ends. Okay, there's our third paintbrush. Kind of looks like a little natural fan brush almost. Now when I was messing with these stems that the curly bits came on, I noticed that the end of the stem is hollow. So that kind of gave me an idea to see if I can make some kind of like a writing implement with this. So I'm gonna cut this just to shorten it a little. So I'm gonna take my scissors on the end where I see that it's hollow, and I'm gonna cut at an angle, a pretty sharp angle. And then it leaves some little corners here. I don't know if you can see that. It's pretty small. I'm just gonna shape it with my scissors lightly until it's got a nice fine point on the long side. So we're kind of making like a quill pen. So can you see how that's cut at an angle now? And let's see if we can attach these little flowers to a stem, to a stick for a paintbrush. So I'm just gonna break them off of this little stick. We're gonna do this one a little different. I'm gonna tie the knot and then slip those under it. Okay, so there's one in there. And, oh, don't crush it. There we go. All right, there. I think that sits pretty good. They sit pretty level to each other. So then I can go ahead and wrap it and tie it off. All right, so there we have 4 different paintbrushes and a little writing implement. Okay, so now we're all set up to just kind of test our brushes, see what they do. And I'm gonna use watercolor because I feel like these are pretty delicate materials and I don't know that they would really be strong enough to work with acrylic, but maybe. So I'm gonna use liquid watercolor. So this is the Dr. P.H. Martin Hydrus, and my Payne's gray got a little bit of elevation sickness and made a mess all over in my car, so we're gonna use this one. So I'm just gonna put a couple of drops there. And I wanted to use the liquid watercolors, again, just because the materials are delicate and I'm concerned about using them to try and moisten a cake watercolor enough to get the paint off of it. Since this is already liquid, I don't have to worry about that. So I've got my water right here. Hopefully you can see that enough. And I'm gonna try and use this just like a regular paintbrush and just see how it goes. I'm gonna dip it into my water, get the full length of the little wheat bit top thing wet, and get some of the paint on it. Let's see what happens. Actually, I think I want to wet down this paper in parts. So I'm just going to spray a little bit of water across the top half. And the bottom half is still dry, so we'll see what it does on both. Let's start with the dry end. And it's not actually depositing very much. Let's see on this wet side. Well, that's kind of fun. Could get some interesting little shrubs or something going. I think if I were to make another one of these, I would reduce the length by about half. It makes it really hard to control with it being so long. Okay, actually I just broke it in half now, so we'll see. Let's see how it does when it's a little bit shorter. Down here in the dry side, we'll get some nice little scratches. That's a really interesting mark and not something you could get with just, you know, a regular paintbrush. I kind of like that. And up here, I really get the same type of thing, but it's much easier to control. So I like it a little bit shorter like that. Let's try our fan brush looking thing, brush, whatever you want to call it. A little bit of water. And I'm just gonna scrape it through some of this. This is very, very stiff, even with the water on it. Didn't soften up very much. So let's try it in the dry end. We can kind of stipple like that. That would be really good for some wildflowers or something. I kind of like that. We can scratch a little bit. It might be nice for textures in rocks, like for detail work. So you could paint everything else with regular brushes and then come back and just add some little details with a brush like this. A little bit more paint. Let's try it up here in the wetter area. So this part of the paper is drying a little bit. Let's add a little bit more water, and I love it when it back runs like that anyway. And see what happens when we stipple in the, oh, that's kind of cool. I like that. These are going to be fun to use for a painting, I think. We'll go with our little evergreen bit, a little bit of water, a little bit of paint, This brush is going to be different because the material, since it's green still, it's not dry, it's not really going to absorb anything. Well, yeah, it is sucking that paint all the way up there. Let's see what happens in the dry side. Let's get a little more water on there because it's not transferring anything really here. I'm just going to kind of stamp it. No, it's really not doing anything on the dry paper. There we go. That's not very interesting. Let's try it up here in the wetter area. Oh, that would kind of make some cool distant trees. You can't really tell what's going on there. There we go. I like that. So I think I'm going to use this to make some distant trees when we do our actual painting. This one I'm really excited to try out, and hopefully I don't destroy this one testing it because I don't have any more of these little flowers. I could go get some more, but... Okay, so I wet them in the jar just a bit, really dry them off pretty good. And I'm just gonna tap into a little bit of this paint. Ooh, sucked it right up into those flowers. And let's try and stamp. That's nice. Some good little grassy textures. Oh, look at that, that's cool. Let's try that again. So this paper's dry here. And I'm just kind of scraping upwards. That is really nice, I like that. I like that a lot. So all of these brushes so far are working out better than, I expected them to, so can't complain about that. And our last one is our pen that we made. Kind of like a quill pen. So I dipped it just a little bit in the water because if it's dry, it may not suck up so much of this paint, but where it's wet, it'll probably grab a bit more of it. So, yep, I saw it sip right up into there. I'm gonna kind of roll it in that watercolor a bit. And I'm gonna use the long point. Hopefully this is strong enough. We'll see if we can write with it. I don't think it's really strong enough that I could write with it, but I like how it kind of catches and then flicks. That's cool. Let's try it in a wet area. I'm gonna make a new wet area. That would be really cool to do, like maybe the bottom edge of some clouds because of how thin this is. So it deposits the paint really narrowly. I can control it a little bit more. So we might be able to do like some cloud details. Let's try that again. Okay, I think that these are all really fun and I'm looking forward to making a painting with them. I think that between all of these, we should be able to do an interesting little landscape. So I'm gonna reset for that and we'll get started. Okay, so I have another piece of paper here and it's no actual shape in particular. It was from a 9x12 pad and I cut it in half. Used the first half for the test of each brush and I'm using the other half for this painting. So I've decided I'm just gonna kind of go and, let some of the imagery that I saw on the way here and the imagery that surrounds the hotel and everything to kind of guide what I do. But I don't have anything in particular in mind. So I just kind of went for one of my favorite color combinations, and this is Cobalt Violet and Gamboge. And I probably will use some Payne's Gray as well. Sometimes if I don't have an idea, if I just kind of grab a color combination that I really, really like, that kind of helps me get started. Okay, so down here I have the Cobalt Violet and Gamboge and my Payne's Gray right there. Now I remember from my test that this one actually spread the most paint around, so I'm gonna use this as kind of my wash brush. And I'm gonna start by misting the paper almost randomly. I'm not worrying about trying to cover the whole thing. I think I'm gonna mist the other side too. Maybe we can keep the paper a little bit on the flatter side. Perfect. So I'm gonna wet this little brush in the jar, and this is the one that kind of looked like wheat or whatever. And I'm just gonna grab some of my yellow and some of my violet and just kind of start scratching it through this area. Kind of letting what happens happen. And as I notice that something resembles something in particular, I'm gonna kind of go with it. So this almost looks like distant trees to me. So we're gonna stick with that. Maybe, we'll see. Let's spray just a little bit more water, see if we can get that to run a bit. There we go. In Colorado here, there are some really interesting trees. I posted on Instagram in my stories the other day that Colorado grows the creepiest trees. I meant that as a compliment, Colorado. Let's try our little stick in a different way. I'm gonna use it to scratch the paper. So I'm actually gonna just put enough pressure on it to kind of scratch. If it might not be strong enough to scratch the paper. What happens when you scratch watercolor paper when it's wet, the paint kind of soaks down into that little scratch. I'm gonna cheat and use the tip of my palette knife. So just very lightly, you don't have to gouge at it. I'm not putting really any pressure on my knife at all. Let's get some interesting little shapes. You can even take those shapes up outside of where the color ends. Add a couple in here. Just getting really random. So this is almost going to be kind of abstracted. So I'm not going for, you know, a really realistic looking landscape. Just something kind of wild and fun. Let's grab this one that kind of looks like a little fan brush. I wet it, and I'm just going to pick up some of the violet. There's a little bit of that Gamboge in there, but not too much. So just a bit on the end. I'm going to kind of tap it right here at the base and just kind of let it run if it wants to, be solid if it wants to. In some areas it's going to run more because the paper is wetter because I didn't get real specific with how much I wet it. Some areas of this paper are still quite dry. Kind of drag some of that. It's pretty heavy right there, so I'm just kind of dipping into it again and dragging it in a couple of directions. And maybe we'll scratch it up a bit. Kind of give the indication of some little grasses or just other wild plants growing in the area. I have this granulation medium. So this is a transparent medium. It just kind of looks like water. It doesn't have a lot of a smell. A little bit, but not too much. I'm going to dip this in there, really soak that medium into it, and then I'm going to touch it into the violet here and watch what happens. See if I can tilt it a little. I'm going to use this clean one so I don't have to get all that purple in my granulation medium. So what this does, and it works better with some colors than other colors, but it kind of makes the pigments separate. And so, you know how you see some colors where it almost looks like a really fine sand? That's granulation. And so in just a second, I'm trying to let it run a little bit. You should be able to see a little bit of that separation in this purple. Just spray a tiny bit more water in there. I have an eyedropper that I usually use for the granulation medium, but I don't think I brought it with me. There we go. So if you can see at the bottom there how it almost looks a little bit sandy and broken. And the more granulation medium you add, the better that works, and the more the pigments will separate and kind of clump together. Just gonna add a little bit more right in here to this piece. maybe I'll spray it with just a little bit of rubbing alcohol. So this is just rubbing alcohol in there. And I'm just gonna lightly, there we go. It kind of pushes the pigment. And so you get these little spots that are really interesting. It helps it get a bit of texture without being too, overly dramatic, I feel like. We talked about adding some distant trees with this brush, so let's do that. I'm gonna get it quite wet in the water jar and just pull a tiny bit of Payne's gray over. So I don't want it to overpower everything. I want it to be very, very faint. Not like that. That's not faint at all. You know what? That's okay. Because watercolor is about experimenting. So I'm just kind of scratching in there. Let's get a little bit more water. And we can spray it with a bit of water. Didn't want that to take over, and it totally did, didn't it? That's all right. There's always a plan B. Let's dab some of that out of there. I really like that right there. That really looks like some distant pine trees. So I'm gonna leave that. I'm just gonna dab out that extra water and paint there. A little bit through here maybe. Just with a slightly damp paper towel, really helps pick it up. Let's do a few on the other side as well. Clean that off, and it's just got some water on it. I'm just going to kind of tap into here because I don't want it to spread too much. I just want to break it up a little bit. Maybe we can do just a little bit more of that rubbing alcohol texture, just right there, very, very loosely. Oh, see, some of the granulation medium ran up here, and I've got a bit of it going on there. I like that. Okay, I think I'm gonna let this dry, and once it's dry, we'll come back and see what else we can do to it. Okay, so my paper is completely dry now, and I think I wanna work on adding just a few more tree elements to the sky, and hopefully this doesn't re-wet too terribly much. So again, I'm just gonna kind of spray it randomly, get a bit of moisture in there. And I'm gonna go back to this one and pick up some more of my Gamboge purple mixture. And just kind of touch it in there and let it go where it wants to go. Let the water carry it. I kind of like this area right here being a little empty. Now, if you're doing this, if you're trying this, I want you to remember that doing something like this is not necessarily about creating an amazing painting. It's just about kind of having a way to connect with the place where you are or the place where you've been. Give yourself something to remember it by. I kind of like how it's not wet over here, so when I tap, it's almost giving me like leaf texture. I think that watercolor is much more interesting and dynamic when you've got differences in your edges. So some of the edges being really faded out and blurred, and some of them being quite sharp and distinct. And so I'm gonna keep doing that. I'm just gonna let this side be much sharper, more distinct, just kind of tapping in some leaves and grasses and whatever. Maybe I'll take my little pen even, a little bit of water, a little bit of my watercolor, and just insinuate some little branches right out there. I like that. Drag a few out here. They'll kind of fade a bit as they get carried away. And I'm going to tap out this little blob up at the top. There we go. Just very lightly. I'm not putting any pressure. Just keep darkening this area. The darker it is and the more distinct the edges are, the closer the element is going to seem to us. Let's go to this one and just kind of, with the tip of it, just kind of pull some little shapes out, get a little water on it. I really like getting these textures that you can't really predict and you can't really control as well. That's really exciting. I like that a lot. I'm going to stick with this brush. I don't know if it's very wet over here. Not terribly. We'll cover up that little spot. I didn't really like that spot. So we'll put a darker color over it and that should hide it. Let's fuzz it out with a bit of water. And we can scratch in some little sticks or branches. If you're kind of a control freak, you might have a hard time with something like this because you might go into it with a specific idea and then get frustrated because these little natural brushes, they don't do what you might have in mind to do. They kind of do what they want to do. I'm going to put just a tiny bit of this rubbing alcohol right there, kind of break it up, keep this spot really open and kind of mystical looking, and that's going to help draw our eye to that area. If everything else is quite dark and then we've got this bright spot right there, that's going to be our focal point. So what I want you to do if you do this is just play and have fun. Find out what happens. I'm going to grab just a little bit of my Payne's gray. Let's see if I can get some little sticky bits. Right there, just kind of scratch them in. Nice and dark, we'll have our darkest value right here, right next to our brightest value, which is right here. And that should help create that drama that we're looking for, that I'm looking for. I don't know what you're looking for. Your goals with your painting, with your natural brushes might be totally different. See, it kind of split there, my stick split, so I got two little branches and I kind of like that. If I flick it a little, it kind of splashes everywhere, and that's kind of fun too. Let's keep that going with the Payne's gray. Get it into some of these forward trees that we made. This one's pretty dark already. Let's lighten it up a little bit. It's still pretty wet. I'm just going to tap it with my paper towel. Just a little. There we go. Let's go back to our little fan brush looking one and get some of those darker grasses with the Payne's gray right at the base of these bushes. I'm just scratching just a few of them in. And just texturize that ground a little bit more, scratching side to side. It's super abstract. I'm not going to put too many of them right here where I want that to be the brightest. Whoops. The hazards of using natural materials. Going into that purple Gamboge mixture. Just kind of the same thing. It's flicking everywhere and that's cool. I like that, but I'm gonna spray it with some of the rubbing alcohol and see what happens there. You'll soften it just a little bit. Didn't spread it too much. Let's do some of the granulation medium there, actually. I'm gonna drip a little bit of purple, just like one drip. One drip of the Gamboge, and now some granulation medium. Little spritz of water there. And let it run. And again, if it's too dark, just very lightly tap out a little bit of it. Just lift a tiny bit to reveal some of the colors and textures that dried underneath it. And that was rubbing alcohol again. I think I'm almost done. Let's wet this corner a bit. And put a little drop of Gamboge. Spread it a little. That might be too bright, so just a little more purple in there, just to tone it down a bit. Spread it with some water. Pulled a little bit of that Payne's gray in there, so I got a hint of green, which is kind of unexpected, but fun, I think. I'm gonna spread it all the way over here, but I'm not gonna leave it there. Make sure that's good and wet. And I'm gonna lift it off, especially here in the middle. So we'll say that maybe this is like a little path coming from this brighter area. And maybe I'll dab just a bit of this darker color with these little flowers. I didn't wet them this time. Let's see what happens. And then last, and then I think I'm about done. I'm just gonna scratch in some grasses with the edge of my palette knife right in here. You can't see it too well now, but once it dries, you'll be able to see it. Like you can kind of see the branches that we did up in these trees before. Don't gouge it too hard. If you gouge it too hard, you're gonna dig down into the paper and you'll actually kind of ruin it, scrape it too far. It's just light pressure. Okay, after letting this dry for a few minutes, I felt like this area is just a little bit too dark. I want to give it kind of a pop, something to really look at. I'm going to take some white acrylic ink. This is the Liquitex Acrylic Ink. Just put out a couple of drops of it there. My little flowers. Kind of dip it into there, get a bit of that, tap it off a bit. And then I'm just lightly gonna tap, a little heavier here in the front so it's a bit bigger. Some little flower shapes. Kind of scatter some that way. And lighter as the paint starts to wear off. Just some smaller ones up there. Ooh, that was still wet, so it kind of pulled them in a little. I like that. Little hints right through here. All right, now I feel like I'm done. Let's see if I can sign it with this my little pen that I made. Not really. It's passable though. And there's our abstract watercolor vacation memorial painting. So of course this painting, I didn't have any planning that went into it. Had I had a little bit more time to plan it, then it might be a little bit more of an impressive painting. But the thing about making paintbrushes the way that we did today is I don't know what the longevity is of these brushes. You know, I picked these materials right before I made the video. And especially these green ones, I didn't know if they'd start falling apart. So I wanted to just immediately use them. If I were to go and pick fresh materials for these now that I know what they do, then I would be able to take a little bit more time and plan out a painting around them. But for how it turned out, you know, making our own paintbrushes, I had never done this before. You guys saw me do it for the first time. And so I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I have never made any kind of paintbrushes before out of natural materials, let alone create a painting out of them. So, while not incredibly impressive, I'm still very proud of it. And I think I want to see if we can get this framed and include the paintbrushes in the frame so that we can always remember our trip to Estes Park and the Stanley Hotel.
Unforgettable.
So I encourage you, you know, if you go on a trip or if you have a place that has special meaning to you, gather a few materials from the plant life around in that area, see what you can come up with as far as brushes go, and then just create a painting, you know, off the top of your head. Don't try too hard to create something completely impressive. Just let the area and the feelings that you get in that area, as well as the materials that you're using as paintbrushes, let those inspire the painting. And I do have to give a huge thank you to Mr. Jane, because I told him that I wanted to find some materials to make paintbrushes with, and he found, or pointed out at least, almost every one of those materials. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
And this is our last night in the infamous room 217 at the Stanley Hotel. We have yet to experience any paranormal activity, but we're hoping that tonight that can happen before we go home, so we don't have to go home without any new ghost stories. Mr. Jane is a little scared.
Terrified.
All right, thank you as always for painting with me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.